And we are live. So welcome for those of you who are watching live immediately, and well done for being logged on conscientiously. We're going to get started with this Monsenso seminar in just a minute or two. I'm just going to give people a minute or two to log on and catch up with things. We have a somewhat different format this month than in previous seminars, where we will have, rather than a more standard academic presentation, we will have an interview with our speaker, Erik Rietveld. Erik is going to be speaking about affordances and freedom in skilled action on a number of issues relating to his Skilled Intentionality Framework, has been developing with colleagues over the course of several publications now. So Erik will be interviewed by journalist Sarah Muehlman, and yeah, so we have, maybe give people just one more minute to log on. Okay, so once we begin, I'm going to step away and allow Sarah to run the show from that point on, and as needed, I'll step back in for some of the discussion and questions section towards the latter end of the session. Okay, so hopefully we have a few people viewing now, and I think we are ready to go. So without further ado, I'll ask Sarah Muehlman to speak with Erik Rietveld about affordances and freedom in skilled action.
Thank you, Erik. Hi, I'm Sarah Muehlman, and I'm here with Erik Rietveld, a senior researcher at the University of Amsterdam. You have been working on skilled action for the past 14 years. Can you tell us why you believe skilled action is important and how your focus has shifted during these years?
Yes, I think skilled action is important because we do so many things skillfully in everyday life, from riding our bikes, riding our cars, making phone calls, having a conversation as we're having now, making your notes with your pen. In everyday life, in many situations, we just act skillfully without even being aware that we are so skillfully in what we're doing. We take it for granted, as it were. And this skillful engagement with the world is important for understanding both everyday actions and for understanding all forms of expertise, like surgeons operating, or nurses taking care of someone, or philosophers writing a text. Many forms of expertise also manifest skill. So it's omnipresent in everyday life, and I think it is important to investigate it for my field of research, for embodied cognition. Basically, I think that the core of what embodied cognition is this skillful engagement with the environment. We are being brought up in sociocultural practices, and over the course of time, by interacting with other people and interacting with the environment, we acquire these skills, and basically our body carries them with us to all the situations in which we act. So embodiment can be understood in terms of this skillful engagement with the particular situation in which we act. Mm-hmm. You asked also how my work on skilled action has been shifting over the course of these 14 years. I think the main distinction there is that in the first, say, 10 years, I've been focusing on unreflective skilled action, so things we do adequately, yet without any deliberation, and in which we normally, in which the use of language also isn't that important. Mm-hmm. And the last few years, I've started to focus on all sorts of skilled action. So not just unreflective skilled action, but also things for which we do use language. and for which we do deliberate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Can you name me some examples?
Now, one important example would be making what philosophers call an epistemic judgment. Mm-hmm. For instance, judging correctly that the color of your cup is white. Mm-hmm. That is something that is a linguistic action, and that traditionally by people who work on skilled action, like one of the most famous there is Hubert Dreyfus. Mm-hmm. He would see this kind of epistemic color judgment as something that is to be understood in a very different way from our normal drinking from a cup.
Yes.
Whereas I would say, no, it's a similar kind of engagement with the world. We can understand both in the same way. And now you probably would like to know how I think we can understand both. Yeah. So what I found out in these earlier years of working on skilled action is that we can try to understand it in terms of our responsiveness to affordances offered by the environment. Mm-hmm. And affordances are the action possibilities that the environment offers. So a chair for its sitting, your pen for its writing, mm-hmm. My cup of water for its drinking. Mm-hmm. Our entire environment offers many, many possibilities for action. Mm-hmm. And already in the work of, for instance, the philosopher Merleau-Ponty, who has been very influential in this field of embodied or enactive cognition, this engagement with the possibilities for action that the world offers is quite central. He writes somewhere that we can understand the world as offering all these action mm-hmm. possibilities. Then Hubert Dreyfus has been centralizing this. Dreyfus is a very influential philosopher in the philosophy of embodied cognition. But he always emphasized our unreflective engagement with the world, and that for that the responsiveness to affordances is crucial. Mm-hmm. But always maintained that when we start using language or when we do things as making this kind of epistemic judgment that this is mm-hmm. like, then we need to switch to a different kind of more reflective cognition. I want to do away with this distinction between reflective and unreflective cognition and foreground the skillful engagement with affordances. Also in the case of making such a color judgment that this is light. We can see that also in terms of the cup offering the possibility to correctly judge that it's white. Just as it offers the possibility to drink from it. And once someone is skilled, mm-hmm. He or she can just be responsive to that possibility if it's relevant in the particular situation. Mm. So there's just one overall way of engaging with things skillfully, namely skilled engagement with the affordances offered by the environment.
And during the course, you have created the Skilled Intentionality Framework.
Yeah.
How does this relate to this?
Yes, actually, that's also related to one of the developments that we've been going through. So at first, I was thinking, as most people still are, in terms of engagement with one affordance at a time, one mm-hmm. relevant affordance that draws you to act. Like this cup of water can invite me to act from it when I'm thirsty. This affordance can become a soliciting or inviting affordance, mm-hmm. And I drink from it when I'm thirsty, or when I want to give an example, like now. Mm-hmm. And so that is an engagement with one affordance.
Yes.
But in reality, we engage with multiple affordances at the same time. Like now, we are having, I'm answering your question, and nested in that answering of the question is the engagement with this affordance offered by the cup to drink from it. Yeah. So I'm engaging both with our conversation mm-hmm. and with this possibility to drink from. And this is how we normally deal with our environments. We have a grip on multiple affordances simultaneously. And skilled intentionality is basically coordinating with multiple affordances at the same time.
Mm-hmm. And is that new? Is that
yes, framing it, foregrounding this multiplicity of the engagement with affordances, with multiple affordances at the same time, I think it's new and making it so central in the field of embodied cognition, mm-hmm. and saying embodied cognition is this coordination with multiple affordances at the same time. Yeah.
You received a starting grant from the European Research Council.
Yeah.
Can you tell us something more about the project?
Yes. So basically, this project is about investigating how far we can, how far this idea of skilled intentionality can bring us in understanding skilled action, including forms of higher cognition, so-called higher cognition, like judging that this is right, or dealing with things that are not present, say, dealing with the possibility of asking Marek to call someone now for us. Say. So this kind of opportunities for action that are not visible here and now, but there are still possibilities for action that the environment offers. That is also included in this notion of skilled intentionality. And what we try to do is to see, basically we try to see the coming 5 to 10 years, if we can understand the entire spectrum of things that people do skillfully in terms of this engagement with multiple relevant affordances at the same time. And in order to keep it concrete and situated, it is not just a theoretical, philosophical, armchair philosophical project, but it is situated in concrete practices. So we will observe using ethnographic methods, observe how architects in practice basically are doing what is traditionally called problem solving or higher cognition, and we try to see if while they are doing, say, the design of a new building, something that is not present and that is traditionally seen as a form of higher cognition, if we can still understand that in terms of engagement with multiple affordances at the same time, so in terms of skilled intentionality.
Yeah.
So the first is a more philosophical project, trying to understand what are affordances, what are affordances for higher cognition. Julian Kiverstein is one of the team members working with me on that, and I'm very happy to have Julian on board because he's really a very good philosopher. So Julian is a team member. Then I have an architect embedded in practice, working on possibilities for supported standing, trying to change the world, as it were, so that we will, in 10 years' time, have an interview like this standing rather than sitting.
Okay.
Changing basically making possibilities for supported standing.
So there's an ideological component as
well.
well.
it's more. So one of the things that is characteristic of human beings is that we can also change our form of life, change our ecological needs, and change the social cultural practices, and that we can, how do you say, that we can willfully change these practices, and for that it's good to try to engage with that, but it's also a fascination that I have to see if it's possible to do in the practice of architecture such a project. Yeah. It's also the visual component of this project, so there's also actually an artistic dimension. There will be installations built, so there's work going on there, but that involves a lot of higher cognition to make these art installations and architectural objects. Another philosopher who has also a background in ecological psychology, so the tradition in where this thinking in terms of affordances comes from, ecological psychology. Gibson coined the term, and he was an ecological psychologist. And Rutger van Dijk, who has been working in human movement sciences and is a philosopher. He basically will be observing in practice how the architects are actually doing this kind of problem solving in practice, imagination in practice, all these things that people think that embodied cognition cannot deal with. And then we will see if we can understand that in terms of engagement with multiple affordances simultaneously. And I should say that related to this and parallel to this is work that we're doing on the brain stimulation in the practice of psychiatry, where we actually see how in certain kinds of patients skilled action breaks down and is basically regained by means of deep brain stimulation treatment. I don't have time to get into that now, but it's basically looking at pathology and how when people recover from their pathology, basically regain their normal engagement with affordances. Mm-hmm. And finally, there is so Maarten van Westen is working on that, and there's Jelle Bruineberg, who with me looks at the neurodynamics. So what's going in the brain and the body when we are engaging with relevant affordances.
So you're connecting and also different fields in your project.
And that is one thing that this Skilled Intentionality Framework makes possible. Mm-hmm. So the Skilled Intentionality Framework is central in this entire project. It's basically a conceptual framework for embodied cognitive science and an active cognitive science that thinks of of people's relation to their environment as one coupled individual environment system. Mm-hmm. It sees individuals as situated in an entire landscape of affordances, and we should think of it as one dynamical coupled system, the individual in this environment, which also includes other people. Mm-hmm. And the Skilled Intentionality Framework basically is a tool to connect insights from ecological psychology, where we have this landscape of affordances in which we are situated and through which we move and in which we develop. Mm-hmm. On the one hand, and then on the other hand, we have our bodily responsiveness to relevant affordances, which is basically the neural part and the biological part. And then there's a phenomenological dimension, that is how we can be invited by affordances and tend towards a grip on multiple relevant affordances in the situation.
You have also been working with famous emotion psychologist Nico Freda. Mm-hmm. How does emotion fit in this Skilled Intentionality Framework?
It fits in a very, very fundamental way. So the Skilled Intentionality Framework has affectivity, as I would call it, at its core. It starts from this idea of an individual coupled to the environment, but this individual environment system, always, to use Merleau-Ponty's words, there's always a lack or a kind of disequilibrium in the coupling of a living being to its environment. Mm-hmm. You should think of the environment as enormously rich and of living beings as very limited and very needful. So in order to maintain themselves, but also to flourish, there's always things lacking. Mm-hmm. And this lack is basically a kind of disequilibrium in this individual environment system that we can see as a very basic kind of how do you say, as founding a very basic kind of concern. Mm-hmm. So basically, individuals care about reducing this lack in the particular situations by trying to improve their situation, by trying to improve their grip on the situation, mm-hmm. By means of responding to affordances. So it's this lacking that living beings always have that makes certain affordances stand out as relevant, mm-hmm. In the situation. For instance, when I get thirsty, this cup with water, this glass with water, becomes a soliciting affordance. Mm-hmm. Or when I want to give an example. Yeah. There's another way. If I have time to explain, there's another way in which emotion is very central in the Skilled Intentionality Framework. So it's not just this tendency towards grip that always matters to the individual, but there's also that once we once we are in this needful state and this glass of water solicits, then it triggers an action readiness, a state of bodily action readiness in the individual. And that's basically a tendency to improve the relation between individual and world, or to modify, is more general way of putting it, the relation between individual and world. And this notion of action readiness was what Nico Freiger, the emotion psychologist who I work with, basically saw as essential for emotions. Essential for emotion is the state of action readiness that helps you to modify your relation to the world. And what I've been doing is basically taking this notion from emotion psychology and make it very central, because what I try to show is that we can understand our responsiveness to the relevant affordances around us on the bodily side in terms of multiple relevant affordance related states of action readiness. So not just one state of action readiness to drink this, but I'm now also ready to answer your question, for instance, and to give an example, and to maintain, to make sure that I don't fall off the chair, say, not losing my balance.
But if it's true that affordances drive all human action, then can we still consider ourselves free beings?
Yeah. So first of all, I try to limit what I might claim to skilled action. So I would say affordances drive all skilled action.
Okay.
Can we understand that? What is the role of freedom then, if we are basically solicited by the cup to drink it, or by a question to answer it? That's a very important question, I think. The role of freedom in skilled action. Partly because so often we don't deliberate while we are engaging with a cup or with things. Traditionally, for instance, in the work of the philosopher John McDowell, there is this notion, what we call strong spontaneity, which is basically the possibility to step back and reflect on the situation. That is the paradigm case of freedom, something that humans have, but that other animals don't have, we would say. Now, I wouldn't deny that we have this possibility to reflect on the situation and say, I could. When you ask me a question, I could start basically thinking now, do I want to answer a question? That is a possibility, but our normal way of engaging with the world is one of being ready for what is to come. So in this case, you're here because I thought you would be a great interviewer. It's not for nothing that questions coming for you are questions that are welcomed here. And more generally, we bring our skills to the situation, and we bring our concerns to the situation. So that's what matters to the situation. When this cup solicits drinking, or this glass solicits drinking from, then it is because I feel needful. So there's this lack on my side that makes this solicitation show up. So it's not, it's a relational thing, the solicitation. So it's not just the glass, it's soliciting because it matters to me when I'm thirsty. Moreover, I have the skill to drink from it. And this I've acquired in practice. I wouldn't drink from your cup. So this wouldn't even invite me to drink from, but this one does. So
there's the individual, or the freedom.
No, the freedom is basically in letting yourself be drawn, in the letting yourself be invited. There's the freedom, but also in the fact that we always, again, have a grip on our are solicited by multiple possibilities for action. So we are selectively open. And we don't have to choose consciously, but we can basically switch. If I rather would have tea, there in the back there's tea, so I could go stand up and take tea. So the possibility to get tea is available. But this affordance at this moment solicits me more than the tea which is there and which I could get. often we switch unreflectively from doing one thing to another. And we can basically rely that we will be solicited by the relevant affordances for it. And this is what goes wrong in certain pathologies, like the patients with obsessive compulsive disorder that we work with. They would first start, for instance, cleaning the table,
yes,
and cleaning the glass, and only then could go drink it. So often they don't. They're not able to engage, to let themselves be drawn by the relevant, by what we would normally consider the relevant affordances, because they have this this dominating solicitation of first having to clean everything before they can do the things that normally would matter to them, and that again after the brain stimulation treatment come to matter to them, and then they can also say yes. It was a pathological kind of. I didn't want to do it, this cleaning, but still the tension that I felt if I wouldn't do it is so strong. It is as if I'm pushed on the water if I don't go into it. So yeah, in that kind of case, basically you see what we take for granted going on. Yeah.
I'm sure if people want to read more about deep brain stimulation, you can find all sorts of things
online. It's one of the, on my website, there's a lot.
ErikRietveld.com.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much for this moment, Erik Rietveld. And let's switch back to Marek and the questions of the online viewers.
Okay, thank you very much to both Erik and Sarah. There are possibly a few questions come in. I think probably the first that I should deal with, our first asked question was asked a couple of days ago, Erik. So you've had a little bit of warning about it, and it's a question from Andrew Wilson, who's based in Leeds. I'm not sure if Andrew was able to join live, but in case he wasn't able to, he wanted to make sure that you answered the question about how the affordances are perceived. So I suspect that this is driven by this distinction that you made between the more traditional ecological approach, which tends to emphasize or tends to examine affordances singularly, versus the multiple sort of tapestry of affordances that plays such a central role in the Skilled Intentionality Framework. So can you say a little bit then about how those two views differ? Your approach that emphasizes multiple affordances versus individual ones, and then perhaps speak specifically to Andrew's question about how these multiple affordances are perceived.
Yes, I can do that. Traditionally, an affordance, like the possibility to drink the water from the glass, there's information here in what they call the optic array that specifies the affordance to drink from it. So there is basically a one-to-one relation between this possibility for action and the visual system that is able to perceive this affordance. What we try to do, and I think Andrew's question is basically also related to a different way of defining affordances, because what we have proposed is to define affordances as relations between aspects of the social material environment. And that can be Sarah asking a question. Her words are also aspects of the social material environment. Or it can be the cup with the water that is here. Or it can be the tram that stops around the corner. There's many aspects of the social material environment, and this is one, and the paper is one. And there's many abilities that are available in the human form of life. And together, a relation between an aspect of the social material environment and the abilities available in the human form of life are what we call affordances. So it's basically a development of Tony Chemero's definition of affordances as relations between what he calls features and what we call aspects of the environment, and then the abilities of what we say available in the human form of life. So now what Andrew always would like to know is something basically very simple. He says, yeah, when an affordance is a relation, how then can it be perceived? And I think the answer to that is very simple. And the possibility to drink from this can indeed be a relation between this aspect of the social material environment and our ability to drink from it. But it's not just this relation, it's still also this aspect of the social material environment to which I can couple on the basis of the skills that I've acquired. There's just the regularities in the environment that make it possible for me, who is familiar with this aspect of the environment, to couple with it and to engage with it. So I think it's primarily, this simple answer actually, that something can be both a relation and it can be still an aspect of the social material environment.
Okay, thank you. So I just have one quick follow-up on that, which just in the way that you described it there, so the more traditional Gibsonian ecological psychologists very much push the notion that affordances are dispositions, whereas you're taking the relational view. But just from the last few things of what you said there, are you suggesting then that there are dispositions, but they aren't what makes something an affordance? What's making it an affordance is its role within the socio-material aspect of it. So the disposition is only one component. It might be an essential component. It's necessary, but not sufficient for an affordance. Is that right?
Yeah, I would formulate it slightly differently. I would say that to understand affordances, we should look at primarily at the level of the ecological niche, at the level of the form of life of a kind of being. When Sarah and I leave this room, this chair that is here still affords sitting. So the aspect of the social material environment maintains, and the affordance maintains, because the possibility and the ability to sit on it still is present in the form of life. I think the main thing is to do justice to the materiality, or better, to the social materiality that is available in the human ecological niche, and the aspects of which we can be engaging with once we have the ability to pick up the affordances, and we learn these abilities in sociocultural practices in the human form of life, at least. In other forms of life, that's of course they learn it in different ways, or they already possess the ability to engage with certain affordances, like a newborn may possess the possibility to drink, say. So I think that's in short the answer.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to have one quick final follow-up on that, but just before I do, we have another person in the live discussion here, Andrew Martin. I think, if I have read the name correctly. I'm going to give Andrew an opportunity to speak, but I didn't want to do so without warning him in advance that I was he was going to have the opportunity to do so. So I'll ask my next question, and then Erik, when you're completed answering Andrew, you'll be teed up and ready to go if you have a question that you'd like to ask. So Erik, just to the follow-up then is just again to try to specify a little bit more clearly for myself, really, the distinction between your approach and the ecological approach, and this strong emphasis on the sociocultural practice, which Gibson mentioned but never really had time to dig into in depth. Is that basically because both the Gibsonian and your own skilled intentionality framework, if it has this emphasis at the ecological niche level, that's something that certainly both of you would share. And Gibson was certainly sensitive to the cultural aspects of things, even though he didn't have time, in essence, to examine them in depth. So would you see your way of thinking really as actually just an extension of the work that Gibson was doing, or do you think it's a different perspective, quite a different path?
No, it's really an extension, and it's trying to do justice to basically an intuition that Gibson had, that affordances are also relevant for understanding the entire spectrum of social meaning in our human form of life. And part of that is the affordance I just already gave the example earlier on to Sarah. This cup here affords judging correctly that it's white. That is something that I can say with my definition of affordances, or I should say with our definition of affordances, because I have developed it together with my team and particularly with Julian Kiverstein. But the possibility to judge correctly that it's white is what typically would be seen as a something that is higher cognition, but which we can understand once we see affordances as this relation between aspects of the social cultural environment, that what is here, and the abilities that we have available in the human form of life. And once I've acquired that ability to judge correctly that this is white, then I can just be responsive to it in the same way as I'm responsive to my own glass of water. So it's basically in order to try to be able to deal with an ambition that Gibson had, namely to deal with the entire spectrum of social significance, that I've basically extended Tony Chemero's definition of affordances a little bit, made it more precise, to show the richness of the abilities, to foreground the richness of the many abilities that we have in the human form of life.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Okay, so Andrew's actually indicated that he doesn't have a question, but if other viewers, there are a number of other viewers online at present. If you're not live in the discussion, you can ask questions through the chat interface on just to the right of where you're watching the video there. You can type questions there and I'll relay them to Erik. So I do, to be honest, Erik, we could just talk for hours. I have lots and lots of questions. I'll limit myself to maybe just one or two more while we give others an opportunity to word their queries. One that I sort of struck me as you were discussing early on with Sarah, the fact that you're looking to supplant in essence, what's sometimes referred to as the dual processing or dual systems concept of psychology, that there is this sort of deliberative mode of thought and this purely habitual or reactionary mode of activity, and you're looking to push something that's much more of a continuum. And I'm just wondering if you see a sort of a clear relationship between the level of skill that a person has and their sort of sensitivity to or awareness of, or in essence really the phenomenology, the consciousness. Because it strikes me that ordinarily we would say the skilled habitual action is something which is associated with lack of awareness. We do it almost unreflectively or unconsciously. But it's sort of also the case that it's situations in which we are most skilled that we become most aware. And I'm just wondering if there's an easy way to describe that relationship, or if it's just a sort of a complicated mess. So I guess the query is there a clear relationship between skill and consciousness within the skilled intentionality framework? Yeah,
I think yes, there is, in the sense that there is what Merleau-Ponty calls the intentional arc, the phenomenon that once you become skilled, you are able to make finer and finer discriminations. in the particular situation. But we shouldn't forget that it's not always necessary to make these discriminations. So, like when you're taking a shower, you may be able to make all sorts of discriminations there in the temperature of the water. Say you're very familiar with that, but normally you just put it on the right temperature. So I think in many cases, the habitual kind of action, you just are responsive in ways that normally work, and that's fine. But once you're talking about skilled action in situations that is more challenging, like the kind of situations that we encounter in the architecture studio, then this ability to make more and more distinctions comes to the fore, in the sense that the more experienced architects are able to see things immediately that a novice basically doesn't see immediately, and is able to respond immediately to certain relevant affordances that a novice doesn't yet see as relevant.
Okay. Yes. No. So I think that clears it up in the sense that as we become more skilled, we are more sensitive to these sort of finer grained details. In an individual instance, then, what drives my sensitivity to those details is separate to the it's something bigger than there's a bigger issue at play, rather than just do I have the skill to do so.
Yeah, I can say a bit more about it also on the basis of what we've observed in architecture. So there's this phenomenon of directed discontent that you observe in the practice of architecture. I think it's a very general phenomenon. It's basically a kind of dissatisfaction that the architects at work experience when they are working on a design. And it's this dissatisfaction that drives their selective openness, as we call it, for the relevant affordances in the situation. So it's similar to if I would now have to make a sketch, say, in order to show you something, then I would now turn to Sarah and ask her if I could borrow this and sketch on the background of the piece of paper. So in this what I call this disequilibrium or discontent or disattunement in the particular situation basically drives the selective openness for the relevant affordances in the particular situation. So that's what the affordances we pick up on are affordances that are relevant in the situation that we are in now. And of course, on the basis of the skills that we have. As always, you need to have a skill in order to be able to respond to an affordance.
Okay. So I'll just ask you one quick question about the empirical aspect of the project. And again, it's mainly about trying to differentiate your skilled intentionality framework from the framework that exists within Gibsonian ecological psychology. What do you think is the difference in practice in the way that the science gets done when you attempt to answer questions from your point of view versus, for example, a more traditional Gibsonian point of view?
Yes, I think so what we are doing in practice is still doing philosophy. So what we're trying to develop is our understanding of affordances for higher cognition, our understanding of how people couple with multiple affordances simultaneously. But we don't do experiments. We basically use more ethnographic methods to see in concrete situations in all their complexity and over a long period of time how an architect is situated in its situation and uses his or her skills to improve the situation or to change the situation by means of responding to affordances. So I think the main difference is that whereas in empirical research, typically the context is how do you say, bracketed in this kind of philosophy that we are doing. We are basically foregrounding the complexity of the situation by showing how people have acquired skills over time, have acquired familiarity with things that are not present here, but they still share their history together of having been at the site of where they are building, for instance. So it's a different way of looking. It's basically, we look to the situation in all its richness, including the past history of the people who are present. And that's necessary in order to understand why they are responding to certain affordances rather than others. And why they are able to communicate to each other with so little words. To understand the common grounds, you need to understand their common history of them.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so I think we are running towards the end of time now. I'll not ontologically, obviously, just within this session, we'll say. So I just give some of the online viewers, there's a number of them there, just one more moment to ask a question if you'd like to ask a question for Erik. Without that, then maybe we will bring the session to a close. So it just remains for me to say thank you very much to both Sarah and Erik for the time, for a fascinating discussion. It was actually a lovely format for me. I think it was the conversational style and to draw out the issues and illustrate them was kind of a very pleasant way in which to do it, and such a delightful context in which it was conducted too. It's a beautiful room.
Thank you for the invitation, Mark.
Thank you.
So. Okay, and so thanks to everyone, and the ENSO seminars will be back in 2017. Thanks, Sal.